Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Ocean. Tonight, we are going to drift back through the veils of deep time, leaving the modern shoreline behind to immerse ourselves in the slate-grey waters of the Mesozoic era, specifically to meet the most specialized and hydrodynamic marine reptiles to ever swim the earth, the Ichthyosaurs. To find them, we must first transport our minds to the Jurassic coast of Dorset, England, specifically to the crumbling cliffs of the Blue Lias Formation. Imagine standing on a beach where the cliffs are composed of alternating layers of dark limestone and shale, looking like a giant, fossilized layer cake. These rocks were once the mud of a warm, shallow, tropical seabed, roughly 200 million years ago. The air smells of salt and wet clay. As the cliffs erode under the gentle persistence of the English rain, they reveal the bones of creatures that dominated the oceans long before the first whale sang its song. We are here to uncover the fish lizard, a creature that represents one of evolution's most perfect experiments in returning to the water. A biological submarine that patrolled the global currents for over 150 million years, leaving its skeleton etched into the stone as a testament to the enduring power of the sea. The story of the Ichthyosaur's discovery is inextricably linked to the keen eyes of a young girl named Mary Anning, who walked the stormy beaches of Lyme Regis in the early 19th century. In 1811, when she was just 12 years old, her brother Joseph found a massive skull protruding from the cliff face, and months later, Mary painstakingly excavated the rest of the skeleton. It was a 4-foot-long beast that looked like nothing science had ever seen. The creature had the jaw of a crocodile and the backbone of a fish. At the time, the concept of extinction was still a radical and dangerous idea. People believed the Earth was young and unchanging. Mary's discovery shattered that stillness. She revealed a monster that no longer existed, a dragon of the deep that had vanished eons ago. Imagine the sensation of brushing away the wet, grey clay to reveal a row of sharp teeth and a massive eye socket staring back from the rock. This discovery did not just add a new animal to the catalogue, it opened the door to the concept of deep time, proving that the ocean was once ruled by dynasties of reptiles that are now nothing but stone shadows in the mud. The name Ichthyosaur itself is a linguistic bridge between two worlds, derived from the Greek words ichthys, meaning fish, and sauros, meaning lizard. It was coined in 1821 by Henry de la Beche and William Coney-Beare, who struggled to classify the animal. Was it a fish? Was it a lizard? It seemed to be both. This taxonomic confusion highlights the phenomenon of convergent evolution, where unrelated animals evolve similar shapes to solve the same problem. The problem was water resistance. To move efficiently through a dense, fluid-like water, physics dictates a specific shape, the spindle or fusiform shape. The Ichthyosaur, starting as a land reptile, slowly smoothed out its angles, shortened its limbs, and streamlined its body until it looked remarkably like a modern tuna or a dolphin. It is a lizard that decided to become a fish, shedding its terrestrial heritage to embrace the geometry of the ocean, proving that the demands of the sea will sculpt any material, mammal, reptile, or fish, into the same perfect hydrodynamic curve. The timeline of the Ichthyosaur is vast, stretching from the early Triassic, around 250 million years ago, to the late Cretaceous, about 90 million years ago. They were not a flash in the pan. They ruled the oceans for a period 3 times longer than the reign of the mammals. They appeared shortly after the Great Dying, the Permian-Triassic extinction event that wiped out 96% of marine life. Into this empty, silent ocean, the ancestors of the Ichthyosaur waded. They flourished during the Triassic and Jurassic, becoming the dominant marine predators. However, their reign ended mysteriously before the asteroid struck the dinosaurs. They faded away in the Cretaceous, replaced by the plesiosaurs and the mosasaurs. Their history is a long arc of dominance, followed by a quiet, unexplained decline, leaving the stage just before the final curtain fell on the Mesozoic. Ghosts that haunt the mid-layers of the fossil record, but are absent from the final catastrophic chapter. The evolutionary transition of the Ichthyosaur from land to sea is one of the most dramatic shifts in vertebrate history, comparable to the evolution of whales. The earliest ancestors, such as Cartorhynchus, were amphibious reptiles that likely looked like lizard seals, with large flippers and short snouts. They lived on the shoreline, perhaps hunting for clams or slow fish. Over millions of years, the lure of the open water pulled them deeper, their legs transformed into hydrofoils, their finger bones multiplying into a mosaic of ossicles to form wide, stiff paddles. Their hips detached from their spines, freeing them from the need to support their weight against gravity. They lost the ability to walk. The return to the water was absolute. They became obligate swimmers, creatures that would suffocate if they were stranded on the beach, their bodies supported entirely by the buoyancy of the ocean, a lineage of lizards that traded the sun-baked rock for the cold, crushing embrace of the deep. The convergence of the Ichthyosaur body plan with that of the modern dolphin is so precise that it often confuses the casual observer. Yet the differences are found in the mechanics of their motion. A dolphin is a mammal. Its spine flexes vertically, up and down, a legacy of its running ancestors like the wolf or the horse. An ichthyosaur was a reptile. Its spine flexed horizontally, side to side, like a lizard or a shark. When an ichthyosaur swam, it did not gallop through the water. It undulated. Its tail beat back and forth in a rhythmic sculling motion. Despite this difference in engine mechanics, the external result was the same: a dorsal fin for stability, two pectoral flippers for steering, and a powerful tail fluke for propulsion. The ichthyosaur is a mirror image of the dolphin across 150 million years, a reptilian doppelganger that proves that in the physics of the ocean, there is only one best way to be a high-speed predator. The most striking feature of the ichthyosaur skull is the eye, which is often enormous, sometimes larger than a dinner plate. The species Temnodontosaurus possessed the largest eyes of any animal ever known, measuring over 10 inches in diameter. These massive eyes were supported by a ring of bony plates called the sclerotic ring. This ring sat inside the eyeball itself, preventing the eye from collapsing under the pressure of deep water or distorting during high-speed swimming. Imagine looking into an eye the size of a soccer ball framed by a ring of bone. This adaptation suggests that ichthyosaurs were visual hunters that dived to profound depths where sunlight fades into the midnight zone. They were the owls of the Jurassic Ocean, gathering the faintest glimmers of bioluminescence or the last photons of surface light to spot the silhouette of a squid in the crushing dark. The visual acuity of the ichthyosaur implies a world of hunting that took place in the mesopelagic twilight, deep below the sunlit surface. Modern research on the focal ratios of their eyes suggests they were adapted for low-light conditions, similar to cats or nocturnal geckos. This capability allowed them to exploit a niche that other marine reptiles could not reach. While the plesiosaurs paddled in the sunny shallows, the ichthyosaur dived. They likely pursued the deep scattering layer, the massive migration of squid and fish that rise from the depths at night and sink during the day. Their giant eyes were the key to this vertical lifestyle, allowing them to follow the food down into the gloom, turning the dark, cold water into a hunting ground where they were the undisputed masters of the shadow. Despite their complete adaptation to the aquatic life, Ichthyosaurs remained air-breathing reptiles, tethered to the surface by the need for oxygen. Their nostrils were not located at the tip of the snout like a crocodile, nor on top of the head like a whale's blowhole. They were positioned far back on the skull, just in front of the eyes. This placement meant that an ichthyosaur had to break the surface with the top of its head to breathe. It would arc through the water, exposing its eyes and nostrils to the air for a split second to exhale and inhale. This respiratory constraint dictated their behavior. No matter how deep they dived to hunt squid, they always had to calculate the return trip. They lived on a leash of breath, constantly oscillating between the crushing pressure of the deep hunt and the release of the surface air, a rhythm of holding and releasing that defined every moment of their lives. The tail of the ichthyosaur underwent a fascinating evolutionary transformation that we can track through the fossil record. Early ichthyosaurs had eel-like tails that were straight and long. As they became faster swimmers, the tail bent downwards. The vertebrae actually kinked downward at the tip, supporting the lower lobe of a crescent-shaped tail fluke. The upper lobe was made only of soft tissue and cartilage, leaving no bone behind. For a long time, early paleontologists thought the broken tails in fossils were post-mortem injuries. It was only when specimens with preserved skin impressions were found in the Poseidonia Shale of Germany that the truth was revealed. The tail was a reversed shark tail. The shark's backbone goes into the upper lobe. The ichthyosaur's backbone went into the lower lobe. This inverted heterocircle tail provided the thrust needed to cruise effortlessly for miles, a biological propeller pushed by a downward-bending spine. The skin of the ichthyosaur was not covered in scales like a lizard, but was smooth and taut, similar to the skin of a whale or a leatherback turtle. Remarkable fossils from Germany have preserved the cellular structure of the skin, revealing that it was composed of multiple layers of collagen fibers. It was likely firm to the touch, but slightly elastic. Furthermore, trace chemical analysis has detected preserved melanosomes, pigment cells, suggesting that ichthyosaurs were countershaded. They were dark, almost black, on their backs and lighter on their bellies. This camouflage, common in modern predators like the great white shark, allowed them to blend in with the dark depths when seen from above and merge with the bright surface when seen from below. They were cloaked in shadow, wearing the uniform of the stealth hunter, a smooth, dark skin that shed water and hid them from their prey. The reproductive strategy of the ichthyosaur is one of the most definitive proofs of their severance from the land. They gave birth to live young. Unlike sea turtles, which must haul themselves onto a beach to lay eggs, an ichthyosaur could not leave the water. Its body would collapse under its own weight on land. Fossils have been found of mother ichthyosaurs with the skeletons of babies inside their rib cages, and dramatically, mothers who died in the very act of giving birth, with the baby halfway out of the birth canal. These fossils show that ichthyosaurs were born tail first, just like whales and dolphins. This prevents the baby from drowning during the birth process. The head emerges last, allowing it to swim immediately to the surface for its first breath. This viviparity, live birth, was the key innovation that allowed them to conquer the open ocean, severing the final tie to the shore and allowing them to become true pelagic wanderers. The mythology surrounding the sea dragon often intersects with the reality of the ichthyosaur. In the folklore of coastal communities, the large vertebrae found on the beach were often called vertebrates or giant's buttons. The skulls, with their long, toothed snouts, inspired legends of dragons and sea serpents. When Mary Anning found her specimens, they were initially described in the press as crocodiles or unknown monsters. The ichthyosaur embodies the archetype of the sea monster, a serpentine shape with a mouthful of needles. Yet, unlike the mythical dragons that hoarded gold, These dragons hoarded calories in the cold seas. Their reality is more fascinating than the myth. They were not magical beasts, but highly efficient biological machines that solved the problem of survival in a hostile ocean through aerodynamic perfection and sensory superiority. In the late Triassic period, the Ichthyosaurs reached sizes that defy imagination, producing the largest marine reptiles to ever exist. The species Shastasaurus sicaniensis, found in British Columbia, reached lengths of nearly 70 feet, the size of a sperm whale. These titans had bodies as thick as a house and skulls the size of a small car. Unlike the later, dolphin-shaped ichthyosaurs, these Triassic giants were more elongate and whale-like. They likely fed by suction, inhaling swarms of squid or fish. To stand next to the fossil of a Shastasaurus is to feel small in the presence of a true leviathan. They were the blue whales of their time, massive biological submarines that filtered the productivity of the Triassic oceans, proving that the Ichthyosaur lineage was capable of reaching the absolute physiological limits of size allowed by the marine environment. The dentition of the Ichthyosaur was highly variable, reflecting a diverse range of diets, but the classic image is one of a groove lined with precision tools. Most ichthyosaurs did not have teeth set in individual sockets like mammals or crocodiles. Instead, their teeth sat in a long, continuous groove in the jawbone, a condition known as aulacodont dentition. The teeth were conical, striated, and incredibly sharp, designed for piercing and gripping slippery prey like squid, belemnites, and fish. They were not chewing teeth. Ichthyosaurs swallowed their prey whole. Some species, however, had blunt, crushing teeth for eating shellfish, while others, like the giant Shastasaurus, were completely toothless as adults, relying on suction. The classic ichthyosaur snout was a pair of long, snapping forceps, a biological trap lined with hundreds of recurved needles that ensured once a slippery squid was caught, it never escaped. The swimming speed of an ichthyosaur is a subject of intense biophysical study, but all evidence points to them being the fastest marine reptiles of the Mesozoic. Their stiff tuna-like bodies, high aspect ratio tail flukes, and smooth skin suggest they were built for high-velocity cruising and explosive bursts of speed. Estimates suggest they could reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour, comparable to a modern orca or bluefin tuna. This speed was necessary not only to catch fast prey, but to escape larger predators like the pliosaurs. Imagine an ichthyosaur sprinting through the Jurassic Sea, a blur of dark skin and white foam, cutting through the water with a silence and efficiency that human engineering still struggles to replicate. They were the Ferraris of the Jurassic, biological speedsters, tuned for the high-energy chase. The question of thermoregulation, whether ichthyosaurs were warm-blooded or cold-blooded, has recently tipped in favor of endothermy. Their rapid growth rates, active lifestyle, and ability to live in cold, high-latitude waters suggests they generated their own body heat. Oxygen isotope analysis of their teeth indicates a body temperature ranging between 30 and 35 degrees Celsius, similar to modern mammals. They essentially had a homeothermic metabolism. This internal furnace allowed them to hunt in the deep, cold water and traverse global distances without becoming sluggish. They were not lethargic lizards basking in the sun. They were hot-blooded engines burning calories to fuel their constant motion, maintaining a warm core in a cold ocean through a layer of insulating blubber and high metabolic activity. The pathology of the bends, or decompression sickness, is surprisingly evident in the fossil bones of ichthyosaurs. Ideally, a deep-diving animal ascends slowly to allow nitrogen to off-gas safely. However, X-rays of ichthyosaur bones often reveal a vascular necrosis, damage caused by nitrogen bubbles forming in the bone tissue. This suggests that ichthyosaurs frequently pushed their physiological limits, surfacing too quickly from deep dives, perhaps to escape predators or during intense pursuit of prey. They lived on the edge of what was biologically possible, suffering the consequences of their deep-water lifestyle. These scarred bones tell a story of a life lived under extreme pressure, where the bends were a chronic occupational hazard of being a Jurassic deep-sea diver. The social behavior of ichthyosaurs is inferred from the mass accumulations of fossils found in places like the Holzmaden Shale in Germany. Here, hundreds of individuals are found preserved together in the same layer of rock. While this could be a mass death event, it strongly suggests that they lived in schools or pods, much like modern dolphins. They likely coordinated their movements to herd fish or to migrate to breeding grounds. Imagine a superpod of 1,000 ichthyosaurs moving together, their breathing synchronized, the surface of the ocean churning with their dorsal fins. This social structure would have provided protection for the young and increased efficiency in hunting, creating a complex society of reptiles bound together by the need to navigate the vast, featureless ocean. The sheer abundance of the ichthyosaur in the Jurassic seas cannot be overstated. They were the cattle of the sea, ubiquitous and essential to the food web. In some fossil deposits, ichthyosaur vertebrae are as common as seashells. They filled every niche, from small 1-meter-long opportunists to massive open ocean cruisers. They were the background radiation of the Mesozoic ocean, the default large animal that you would see if you looked out over the waves 180 million years ago. Their success was total. They didn't just survive, they thrived in numbers that suggest a healthy, highly productive ocean ecosystem. To find an ichthyosaur fossil is to touch a piece of a world where reptiles were as common as fish, a time when the ocean was crowded with the sleek, dark shapes of the fish lizards, patrolling every latitude of the blue planet. The structural integrity of the ichthyosaur eye was maintained by a remarkable ring of bone known as the sclerotic ring, a feature that looks like a camera aperture made of fossilized petals. This ring was composed of several overlapping plates of bone embedded directly into the white of the eye, or sclera. In the crushing depths where Ophthalmosaurus hunted, the water pressure exerts a force of hundreds of pounds per square inch. Without this reinforcement, the spherical eyeball would distort, ruining the focus of the lens, or worse, collapse entirely. The sclerotic ring acted as a rigid chassis, holding the eye in its perfect shape, regardless of the external pressure. It also provided an attachment point for the muscles that controlled the lens, allowing the animal to shift focus rapidly from the distant gloom to a squid right in front of its beak. This bony ring is often the best preserved part of the skull, staring out from the rock like a pair of stone goggles, a permanent monocle that proves these animals were engineered for a world where the weight of the water was a constant physical antagonist. Recent microscopic analysis of ichthyosaur skin fossils has revealed the presence of melanosomes, the organelles that contain pigment, allowing us to reconstruct their color with unprecedented accuracy. Unlike the artistic renderings of the past that painted them in bright greens or teals, the chemical evidence suggests that most ichthyosaurs were dark, colored in shades of black or deep brownish gray. This confirms the theory of countershading, but it also hints at thermoregulation. A dark black back would absorb heat rapidly from the sun when the animal surfaced to breathe. In the cool marine climate of the Jurassic, this solar heating would have been a vital energy boost. Imagine a creature the color of wet obsidian, slick and dark, basking momentarily at the surface before slipping back into the gray water, a living shadow that absorbed the sun to fuel its hunt in the cold deep. The swimming style of the derived tuna-shaped ichthyosaurs is classified as thunniform locomotion, a mode of movement that represents the pinnacle of hydrodynamic efficiency. In this style, the body remains stiff and rigid, acting as a hull, while only the very end of the tail oscillates rapidly. This minimizes the drag caused by the body bending and yawing in the water. The ichthyosaur's tail was a high aspect ratio hydrofoil, meaning it was tall and narrow, like a crescent moon. This shape cuts through the water with minimal resistance while generating maximum thrust. To achieve this, the ichthyosaur had to develop massive tendons running down its spine to hold the body stiff against the force of the tailbeat. It was a creature under immense internal tension, a coiled spring of muscle and tendon designed to convert metabolic energy into forward motion with almost zero waste, vibrating through the water like a tuning fork. The diet of the ichthyosaur was dominated by belemnites, ancient squid-like cephalopods that possessed a hard internal skeleton shaped like a bullet. We know this because ichthyosaur stomachs are often fossilized with thousands of these hard, bullet-shaped hooks inside. The soft parts of the squid were digested, but the hard hooks of the tentacles and the internal guards accumulated in the gut. Some fossils show dense masses of these hooklets, numbering in the tens of thousands, packed into the abdominal cavity. This suggests that ichthyosaurs were specialists in hunting these slippery, fast-moving invertebrates. It also implies a mechanism for regurgitation. Like modern sperm whales or owls, ichthyosaurs likely had to vomit up the indigestible hard parts of their prey periodically to clear their stomachs. The seafloor of the Jurassic would have been littered with these regurgitated piles of belemnite guards, the silent evidence of a cephalopod massacre carried out by the dragons of the upper ocean. The preservation of soft tissue in the Holzmaden Shale of Germany provides a ghostly, high-fidelity snapshot of the ichthyosaur's true outline, revealing features that bone alone cannot tell us. In these rare fossils, a black carbon film outlines the body, showing the dorsal fin and the upper lobe of the tail. These structures contain no bone. They were made of dense connective tissue, similar to the dorsal fin of a shark. Without these soft tissue fossils, we would never have known that ichthyosaurs had dorsal fins. We would have reconstructed them as smooth-backed lizards. The dorsal fin acted as a stabilizer, preventing the animal from rolling over during turns. Seeing the carbonized shadow of this fin on the rock is like seeing a photograph from 180 million years ago, a delicate biological sail that steered the animal through the currents, preserved by the anoxic mud that refused to let the soft parts rot. The fossil known as the exploded skull phenomenon is a common occurrence in ichthyosaur taphonomy, the study of how they decayed. When an ichthyosaur died and sank to the bottom, the gases from decomposition would build up inside the carcass. If the skin was tough enough to hold the gas in, the body would bloat. Eventually, the pressure would become so great that the carcass would rupture. In the skull, this pressure often blew the bones apart, scattering the jaws, the sclerotic rings, and the roof of the skull across the sediment. Paleontologists find these disarticulated jumbles of bone and have to piece them back together like a puzzle. It is a macabre reminder of the physics of death in the deep sea, where the breakdown of the body turns the animal into a pressurized bomb before it becomes a fossil. The apex predator, Temnodontosaurus, was not just a squid eater, it was a crusher of vertebrates. Reaching lengths of over 30 feet, this giant possessed teeth that were robust and deeply rooted, designed for cutting and breaking bone. Fossil evidence has shown the remains of smaller ichthyosaurs, like Stenopterygius, inside the ribs of Temnodontosaurus. This indicates a tiered ecosystem where ichthyosaurs hunted each other. It was a cannibalistic world. The large adults would patrol the breeding grounds, snatching up the juveniles, or the smaller species. Temnodontosaurus ruled the early Jurassic seas through sheer size and bite force, a reptilian killer whale that recognized no kinship, only the caloric value of the meat swimming next to it. The sensory system of the Ichthyosaur likely included a pineal eye, or third eye, located on the top of the skull. This opening, the pineal foramen, led directly to the brain and was covered by a thin layer of skin. While it could not form images, it was photosensitive. It acted as a dosimeter for sunlight. This organ helped the Ichthyosaur regulate its circadian rhythms, telling it when the sun was rising or setting, even if it was swimming in deep, dim water. It also may have helped with orientation and navigation by sensing the angle of the sun. It was a skylight built into the roof of the head, a direct line of communication between the brain and the sky, allowing the animal to calibrate its internal clock to the rotation of the Jurassic Earth. The extinction of the Ichthyosaurs in the mid-Cretaceous, about 90 million years ago, is a mystery known as the Cenomanian-Turonian anoxic event. This was a period of intense global warming and rising sea levels. The ocean circulation slowed down, and oxygen levels in the water plummeted. This hit the Ichthyosaurs hard. As high metabolism hunters, they needed oxygen-rich water and a steady supply of squid. The collapse of the marine food web, combined with the rise of new competitors like the mosasaurs, drove them to extinction. They did not vanish in a bang like the dinosaurs. They faded away. Their diversity dropped until only 1 or 2 species remained, and then they were gone. The ocean simply became too hot and too stagnant for these high-performance machines to operate. A silent tragedy of climate change that wiped out a dynasty. The genus Urinosaurus represents a radical departure from the standard Ichthyosaur shape, evolving to look exactly like a swordfish upside down. Its upper jaw was elongated into a massive, toothed rostrum that extended far beyond the lower jaw. This sword was lined with sharp teeth sticking out to the sides. Urinosaurus likely used this weapon to slash through schools of fish, injuring them before turning back to swallow the stunned prey. Unlike a swordfish, which is smooth, the Urinosaurus sword was a saw. This convergence shows that the strategy of slashing to feed is a winning one in the ocean, reinvented by reptiles millions of years before fish adopted it. It prowled the Jurassic seas like a reptilian fencer, armed with a biological blade that allowed it to harvest shoals of fish with violent lateral swipes of its head. The graveyard of Shastasaurus in Berlin Ichthyosaur State Park, Nevada, preserves a mass mortality event of giants. Here, nearly 40 massive Ichthyosaurs, each up to 50 feet long, lie preserved together in the rock. For years, scientists debated why they died together. Was it a toxic algae bloom? A stranding? Recent research suggests this site was a birthing ground. The skeletons are mostly large adults, and many are pregnant females. They likely gathered in the shallow, safe waters to give birth, much like modern whales gathering in lagoons. A sudden catastrophic event, perhaps a toxic tide or a rapid drop in oxygen, killed them all at once. The site is a fossilized maternity ward, a place of new life that became a tomb, preserving a single tragic day in the Triassic when the mothers of the deep came to the shallows and never left. The vertebral column of the Ichthyosaur became increasingly simplified and disc-like over time, evolving into a structure that resembles a stack of hockey pucks. These vertebrae are deeply concave on both sides, amphicoelous. This shape allows for flexibility, but also provides strength against compression. The spaces between the vertebrae were filled with cartilage and fluid, acting as shock absorbers. As the animal swam, the spine acted like a stiff rod that could bend slightly, storing elastic energy. This design is identical to that of sharks. It is a convergence of engineering. To build a swimming machine, nature inevitably selects the hockey puck spine. Holding a fossilized ichthyosaur vertebra is like holding a heavy stone wheel, a single component of the biological engine that powered the animal through the Mesozoic currents. The interaction between ichthyosaurs and ammonites was a relationship of predator and prey that left physical scars on the fossil record. Ammonites were shelled cephalopods that filled the seas. While their shells offered protection, ichthyosaurs learned to crack them. We find ammonite shells with distinct V-shaped bite marks that match the jaw profile of ichthyosaurs. Some theories suggest that ichthyosaurs would bite the ammonite to puncture the shell and make it sink, or shake it to dislodge the soft animal from inside. It was a battle between the crushing jaw and the spiral fortress. The seabed is littered with these damaged shells, the discarded wrappers of an ichthyosaur lunch, marked by the teeth of a reptile that knew exactly how to open the hardest nut in the ocean. The auditory system of the ichthyosaur was adapted for underwater hearing, but in a way distinct from whales. They had massive stapes bones, the ear bone, that were stout and heavy. This suggests they could hear low-frequency sounds and vibrations, perhaps the thrumming of a school of fish or the calls of other ichthyosaurs. The ear was insulated from the rest of the skull by cartilage to prevent the animal's own body noise from drowning out the world. While they probably did not echolocate with the sophistication of a dolphin, they lived in a soundscape of low rumbles and clicks. The heavy ear bones acted as conductors, transmitting the vibrations of the water directly to the inner ear, allowing them to feel the sound of the ocean through their skulls. The transition from the basal Myxosaurus to the advanced Ophthalmosaurus tracks the shift from eel-like swimming to tuna-like swimming. Myxosaurus, from the Middle Triassic, was small and had a long, flexible body. It swam by undulating its whole trunk, anguilliform locomotion. It was not very fast. Over 50 million years, the body stiffened. The tail fin developed. The front paddles grew larger. This shift reflects a move from the near shore, cluttered environments, to the open blue water. Evolution streamlined the ichthyosaur, removing the wiggle to create a torpedo. It was a quest for speed, a refinement of the chassis to reduce drag and increase thrust, turning a wriggling lizard into a cruising missile. The sheer density of the ichthyosaur bone structure is a condition known as pachyostosis, particularly in the ribs. The ribs of early ichthyosaurs were thick and heavy. This added weight acted as ballast, helping the animal stay submerged without expending energy to swim down. It counteracted the buoyancy of the air in the lungs. As they became faster swimmers, the bones became lighter and more spongy, osteoporotic-like, to allow for speed. The shift from heavy ballast bones to light, fast bones marks the transition from a lurker to a chaser. The skeleton tells the story of the lifestyle. The heavy bones belong to the slow grazer of the shallows, while the light bones belong to the high-speed hunter of the open sea. The geographical distribution of ichthyosaurs was truly global. Their fossils have been found on every continent, including Antarctica. This proves that they were capable of crossing deep ocean basins. They were not restricted to the coastlines. They possessed the endurance to swim thousands of miles. This cosmopolitan distribution meant that a Jurassic ocean anywhere on Earth was likely patrolled by an ichthyosaur. They were the universal predators, the standard issue marine reptile for the entire planet. Whether in the cold waters of the poles or the warm Tethys Sea, the silhouette of the Ichthyosaur was the shape of fear for 150 million years. The discovery of the soft tissue of the ichthyosaur liver in a fossil from the Solnhofen limestone was a breakthrough in understanding their internal anatomy. The preservation was so exquisite that the outline of the liver could be seen. It was massive. A large liver is common in sharks and marine mammals. It aids in buoyancy, as it is filled with oil, and stores energy. The ichthyosaur liver was likely a high-energy fuel tank, storing lipids to power the animal on long migrations or deep dives. It confirms that their metabolism was running hot, requiring a massive chemical processing plant to keep the engine firing. The coprolites, fossilized dung, of ichthyosaurs are often filled with fish scales and squid hooks, but sometimes they contain something more surprising: sand. It is believed that ichthyosaurs may have swallowed stones or sand intentionally as gastroliths to aid in digestion or buoyancy control, or perhaps they accidentally ingested sediment while bottom feeding. These dense, fossilized droppings provide a direct window into the daily menu. They are time capsules of digestion. Finding a coprolite packed with thousands of tiny fish vertebrae tells us of a day when the ichthyosaur swam through a school of baitfish, gorging itself until its belly was full, leaving behind a stone record of its gluttony. The lost ichthyosaurs of the Cretaceous, such as Platypterygius, show that even in their decline, they were adapting. Platypterygius had broad, paddle-like fins with many extra fingers, polydactyly. These wide wings allowed for greater maneuverability. It was a survivor, hanging on while the rest of its family vanished. It possessed a highly reinforced skull, suggesting it might have rammed its prey or fought with rivals. It is the last of the Mohicans, a final, robust design that patrolled the Cretaceous seaways before the lights finally went out on the lineage, a rugged end to a graceful history. The presence of gastroliths, or stomach stones, in the abdominal cavities of ichthyosaur fossils presents a geological puzzle regarding their function as either digestive aids or ballast regulators. These smooth, polished stones are often found clustered between the ribs, distinct from the surrounding sedimentary rock, indicating they were swallowed intentionally and carried over long distances. While some theories suggest they were used in a gastric mill to grind up the hard beaks of squid and the shells of ammonites, similar to how birds use grit, the sheer weight of the stones in some specimens points toward a hydrostatic function. By swallowing heavy rocks, the ichthyosaur could increase its specific gravity, counteracting the natural buoyancy of its lungful of air. This diver's weight belt would allow the animal to hover effortlessly at neutral buoyancy in the water column, without expending energy to swim downward. The selection of these stones was often specific. Fossils, found in muddy shale deposits, sometimes contain stones that originated from distant rocky shores, implying that the ichthyosaur carried these geological passengers for hundreds of miles, a heavy, secret cargo tucked inside its ribcage that helped it hold its station in the drifting currents of the Mesozoic Sea. The taphonomic phenomenon, known as the broken neck posture, is a grimly poetic signature of ichthyosaur fossils, where the head is almost always found snapped back at a severe angle, sometimes touching the spine. For years, this was interpreted as a sign of a violent death or the agony of suffocation. However, modern forensic analysis has revealed it to be a result of elastic tension in the decomposition process. The powerful ligaments running along the dorsal side of the ichthyosaur's neck, designed to hold the heavy head steady against the drag of water during high-speed swimming, would contract as they dried out or decayed. Without the counter-tension of the living muscles, these ligaments pulled the skull backward like a drawn bow. This posture, the opistotonic pose, is not a record of pain, but a record of the tensile strength of the animal's own anatomy. It shows us that the ichthyosaur was built like a suspension bridge, strung with cables of connective tissue so strong that even in death, they possess the power to snap the skeleton into a rigid curve, freezing the animal in a permanent, backward-looking arch. The discovery of Malawania anachronus in the rocks of Iraq shattered the linear narrative of ichthyosaur evolution, revealing a ghost lineage that refused to change for 65 million years. This species, whose name means immaterial swimmer out of time, was found in Cretaceous rocks, but possessed the primitive body plan of a Jurassic Ichthyosaur. While its cousins were evolving into the hyper-specialized, tuna-like Platypterygius, Malawania kept the older, more dolphin-like shape and the distinct forefin structure of its ancestors. Its existence proves that Ichthyosaur evolution was not a single straight arrow toward a specific form, but a branching bush where living fossils could persist in isolated refugia. Malawania likely inhabited the calm, warm waters of the Tethys Ocean, unaffected by the selective pressures that drove the rapid changes in the open ocean species. It swam through the Cretaceous seas as a relic, a biological time traveler that maintained the classic look long after it had gone out of style elsewhere, surviving in the quiet backwaters of the ancient world. The moniker sea dragon was popularized not by scientists, but by the eccentric collector Thomas Hawkins in the Victorian era, who published The Book of the Great Sea Dragons in 1840. Hawkins was a man of dramatic flair who viewed these creatures as the biblical monsters of the pre-Adamite world. He collected massive Ichthyosaur skeletons from the quarries of Somerset and displayed them with theatrical lighting. He even engaged in the questionable practice of improving his fossils by filling in missing bones with carved plaster and black shoe polish to make them look more complete and terrifying. While his methods were scientifically dubious, his romantic vision cemented the Ichthyosaur in the public imagination as a dragon of the deluge. He transformed the grey bones into characters in a Gothic epic, framing the Ichthyosaur not just as an animal, but as a leviathan that ruled a chaotic, storm-lashed earth before the order of God and man was established. The olfactory capabilities of the Ichthyosaur were surprisingly developed for a visual hunter, utilizing a specialized internal plumbing system that allowed them to sniff the water without choking. The external nostrils, located near the eyes, connected to the internal nares, or choanae, which opened into the roof of the mouth. As the Ichthyosaur swam, water would flow into the external nostrils, pass over the olfactory epithelium, the scent-detecting tissue, and exit through the mouth. This flow-through system acted as a continuous chemical sampler. It allowed the animal to detect the pheromones of potential mates, the metallic scent of blood, or the distinct chemical trail of a squid shoal from miles away. The structure of the nasal capsule suggests they had a keen sense of smell, adding a rich, invisible layer to their sensory world. They were not just watching the ocean, they were tasting the currents, reading the dissolved molecular story of the water as they sliced through it. The daily vertical migration of the Ichthyosaur was a rhythmic commute between two worlds, driven by the movement of the deep scattering layer. During the day, organisms like krill, squid, and lanternfish retreat to the dark, cold depths to avoid predation. At night, they rise to the surface to feed. Ichthyosaurs likely followed this pulse. Fossil evidence suggests that some species, particularly those with the largest eyes, were crepuscular or nocturnal hunters, diving deep during the day to intercept the layer in the twilight zone and hunting near the surface at night. This behavior would have exposed them to a drastic range of temperatures and pressures every 24 hours. They were the elevators of the Mesozoic, moving biomass between the benthic and pelagic zones. Their lives were governed by the sun's position, not because they basked, but because the sun dictated where the food was hiding. The function of the sclerotic ring extended beyond mere structural support. It acted remarkably like the f-stop aperture of a camera lens. The ring was composed of multiple overlapping plates that could slide slightly over one another. This mobility allowed the aperture, the pupil opening, to expand and contract. In the dim light of the deep ocean, the ring would open fully to let in every photon. In the bright glare of the surface, it would constrict. This dynamic adjustment was crucial for an animal that crossed light zones rapidly. Without it, an ichthyosaur surfacing from a dark dive would be blinded by the sun. The ring protected the retina from overexposure while ensuring maximum sensitivity in the dark. It was a mechanical iris made of bone, a piece of precision engineering that allowed the ichthyosaur to maintain visual lock on a target, whether it was backlit by the sun or hidden in the abyss. The evolution of the ichthyosaur flipper involved a process known as hyperphalangy, where the number of finger bones multiplied uncontrollably to form a long, flexible paddle. In a human hand, each finger has 3 or 4 bones. In an ichthyosaur flipper, a single digit could have up to 30 individual bones, stacked like a roll of coins. This elongation transformed the hand into a long, tapering hydrofoil. The bones were encased in a stiff, fibrous tissue that prevented individual finger movement. The hand functioned as a single unit. This structure provided a large surface area for steering and stabilizing. The sheer number of bones increased the flexibility of the flipper tip, allowing for subtle adjustments in pitch and roll. It was a limb that had forgotten how to grasp, dedicating every cell of its skeletal structure to the single purpose of pushing against the water. Alongside hyperphalangy, some specialized ichthyosaurs developed hyperdactyly, the condition of having extra fingers. The standard tetrapod limb has 5 digits. Genera like Platypterygius and Caepulosaurus often had 7, 8, or even 10 digits packed into their front paddles. These extra fingers originated from the splitting of the wrist bones or the development of new digits on the leading edge of the flipper. This widened the paddle significantly, turning it into a broad, fan-like control surface. A wider flipper generates more lift at low speeds, which may have helped these large, heavy animals maneuver during slow cruising or when grappling with large prey. The genetic blueprint for 5 fingers was completely overwritten, the limb developmental program running wild to fill the hydrodynamic needs of the animal, creating a hand that was a mosaic of tessellated bone tiles. The ecological competition between ichthyosaurs and thalattosaurs in the Triassic period was a battle for dominance that the ichthyosaurs ultimately won through sheer speed. Thalattosaurs were another group of marine reptiles, often with long, lizard-like bodies and crushing teeth. They occupied the shallow, coastal niches. However, they relied on undulatory, eel-like swimming, which was energetically expensive. The ichthyosaurs evolved the stiff, tuna-like body plan that allowed for faster, more efficient cruising. This allowed them to move offshore, accessing the vast resources of the open ocean that the thalattosaurs couldn't reach. By securing the pelagic zone, the ichthyosaurs outmaneuvered their rivals. The thalattosaurs went extinct at the end of the Triassic, unable to keep up in the evolutionary race, leaving the ichthyosaurs as the undisputed kings of the high seas until the arrival of the plesiosaurs. The basal ichthyosaur Ichthyosaurus, found in the early Triassic rocks of Japan, offers a snapshot of the transition before the fish shape was finalized. Ichthyosaurus did not look like a dolphin. It looked like a lizard with flippers. Its body was long and slender. Its tail had no bend or fluke, and its skull was relatively small. It swam with an anguilliform motion, wiggling its entire body like a sea snake. It represents the startup phase of the lineage. It lived in near-shore environments, likely hunting slow-moving prey. The existence of Ichthyosaurus proves that the fish shape was not immediate. It was earned over millions of years. The lineage started as a wriggler and ended as a thruster. This animal is the humble, lizard-like root of the family tree, a creature that had dipped its toes in the water but hadn't yet fully committed to the hydrodynamics of the open ocean. The giant Cymbospondylus of the Middle Triassic represents a successful experiment in being an ambush predator of serpentine proportions. Reaching lengths of over 30 feet, It had a long, eel-like tail and a massive skull, but relatively small flippers. It did not chase prey at high speed. It likely waited in the murky water or the kelp forests of the Triassic, striking out with its long neck and snapping jaws. Despite its primitive, elongated shape, it was a top predator. Fossils have been found with smaller ichthyosaurs in their stomachs. Cymbospondylus shows that in the early days of the Ichthyosaur dynasty, there was room for different designs. You didn't have to be a tuna to rule the sea. You could be a giant sea serpent, relying on stealth and a massive reach to dominate the food chain before the oceans became crowded with faster chase predators. The needle-nosed Shastasaurus possessed a rostrum so slender and delicate that it suggests a diet of specialized, small prey hunted with surgical precision. Found in the Middle Triassic of Italy, this 20-foot reptile had a snout that made up more than half the length of its skull. This forceps jaw was likely used to snap at small, fast-moving fish or squid in a way that minimized water resistance. A thick snout pushes a pressure wave ahead of it, warning the prey. A thin snout slices through the water invisibly. Shastasaurus likely hunted by sweeping its head sideways into schools of fish, using the low drag of its beak to catch victims before they sensed the movement. It was the gharial of the open ocean, a specialist that traded bite force for speed and stealth, occupying a niche of finesse in a world of crushing jaws. The mechanical details of Ichthyosaur viviparity, or live birth, reveal the constraints of breathing air while giving birth underwater. The fetus developed inside the mother, curled into a ball. When labor began, the tail emerged first. This breech orientation is critical for air-breathing, marine animals. If the head emerged first, the baby might try to breathe while its body was still stuck inside the mother, leading to drowning. By emerging tail first, the baby's head remains inside, supplied with oxygen by the placenta until the very last moment. Once the head is free, the newborn instinctively swims to the surface for its first gulp of air. Fossil slabs showing multiple babies inside a single mother indicate they gave birth to litters, like some sharks, rather than single calves like whales. This mass birth strategy ensured that even if predators were waiting, some of the offspring would survive the frantic dash to the surface. The hydrodynamics of the ichthyosaur shape are often analyzed using the Reynolds number, a dimensionless quantity in fluid mechanics that predicts flow patterns. Ichthyosaurs operated at a high Reynolds number, meaning inertial forces dominated over viscous forces. In this regime, drag reduction is paramount. The teardrop shape of the advanced ichthyosaurs is the mathematical optimum for minimizing pressure drag. The widest point of the body was located about 1/3 of the way back from the head, tapering gently to the tail. This profile allowed the water to flow smoothly over the body, laminar flow, for as long as possible before breaking up into turbulent eddies. The evolution of the ichthyosaur was essentially a mathematical convergence toward this ideal solution. The physics of the water acted as a lathe, shaving away the unnecessary drag-inducing features of the terrestrial ancestor until only the perfect teardrop remained. The fusion of the atlas and axis vertebrae in the neck of advanced ichthyosaurs was a structural adaptation designed to stiffen the head for high-speed impact with the water. In land animals, a flexible neck is useful for looking around. In a high-speed aquatic predator, a wobbly head is a liability. It creates drag and instability. By fusing the first two neck vertebrae into a solid block, the ichthyosaur locked its head to its body. This created a rigid fuselage from the tip of the nose to the tail. The animal steered not by turning its head, but by banking its entire body using its pectoral fins. This rigidity allowed it to plow through the water like a torpedo. It sacrificed the ability to look over its shoulder for the ability to swim at 40 miles per hour without suffering whiplash from the resistance of the water. The angle of the tail bend in Ichthyosaur fossils serves as a chronometer for their evolution, getting steeper as the millions of years passed. In the early Triassic species, the tail was straight or bent only slightly, perhaps 15 degrees. By the Jurassic, the bend in the tail vertebrae had reached a sharp angle of 40 to 50 degrees. This downward kink supported the lower lobe of the tail fluke. The steeper the angle, the more vertical the tail fluke, and the more powerful the thrust. This increasing angulation tracks the shift from an undulatory, whole-body swimming style to a specialized, tail-only oscillation. Paleontologists can often date an Ichthyosaur fossil simply by measuring this angle. The sharper the kink, the more modern and faster the animal was. It is a protractor measurement of evolutionary progress etched into the spine. The exceptional preservation of the Guanling biota in China provides a technicolor window into the Triassic Ocean, preserving soft tissues and even color patterns. In these limestone beds, Ichthyosaurs, like Guanlingsaurus, are found with their skin outlines perfectly intact. The preservation is so detailed that we can see the layers of blubber beneath the skin. This blubber layer confirms that they were warm-blooded and insulated. The fossils also preserve stomach contents in microscopic detail, revealing the specific species of squid and fish they ate. The chemical conditions of the Guanling seabed, hypoxic and rapidly burying, created a natural laboratory that mummified the marine reptiles. It allows us to weigh the fat on an animal that died 220 million years ago, proving that they were plump, streamlined, and fully insulated against the thermal conductivity of the water. The swordfish Ichthyosaur, Excalibursaurus costini, is a creature that seems to have taken the concept of the rostrum to an extreme. Discovered in Somerset, England, this lower Jurassic animal had a snout where the upper jaw extended far beyond the lower jaw, exactly like the blade of a sword. The name is a nod to King Arthur's sword, Excalibur. This asymmetry is rare in tetrapods. It suggests a very specific hunting behavior, slashing. Excalibursaurus likely swam into schools of fish and thrashed its head side to side, injuring prey with the lateral teeth on its sword, before circling back to eat. This convergence with modern swordfish is one of the most striking examples of nature repeating a design that works. It is a biological weapon, a spear attached to a high-speed engine, designed to inflict trauma on a mass scale within a bait ball. The microscopic architecture of the Ichthyosaur skin reveals a multi-layered mesh of collagen fibers that acted as a biological wetsuit. Fossil evidence shows layers of fibers running in alternating directions, a cross-ply arrangement. This structure provided stiffness to the skin, preventing it from wrinkling or fluttering at high speeds. Wrinkled skin creates drag. By keeping the skin under tension, the collagen mesh maintained a smooth, laminar surface. It also acted as a spring, storing elastic energy when the body flexed and releasing it on the rebound, helping the animal swim more efficiently. This integumentary skeleton meant the Ichthyosaur was wrapped in a high-tech fabric of its own making, a living bodysuit that managed turbulence and stored energy, essential for a creature that lived its entire life in the fast lane of the ocean. The fossil beds of Holzmaden in southern Germany, often referred to as the Jurassic Pompeii, offer a level of preservation so exquisite that it captures the very moment of life freezing into stone. In these slate quarries, thousands of Stenopterygius specimens have been found, not as jumbled bones, but as complete, articulated skeletons, often surrounded by the halo of their soft tissues. The preservation is due to the stagnant, anoxic bottom waters of the Posidonia Shale Sea. When an ichthyosaur died and sank here, It landed in a zone of dead water where there were no scavengers to tear the body apart and no currents to scatter the bones. The bacteria that eventually consumed the flesh precipitated pyrite, fool's gold, around the bones. This means that today, when we split the slate, the golden skeletons of Stenopterygius shine against the black rock. We can see the contents of their last meals, the outlines of their dorsal fins, and even the embryos inside their wombs. It is a mass grave of stunning beauty, a black and gold library where the catastrophic suffocation of an entire ecosystem has been transmuted into a perfect, gilded record of the Jurassic inhabitants. The hydrodynamic design of the Ichthyosaur pectoral fin is a study in the convergence of biological and aeronautical engineering, functioning remarkably like the wing of a high-performance aircraft. The fins of derived ichthyosaurs, like Ophthalmosaurus, had a high aspect ratio. They were long, narrow, and tapered. In aerodynamics, this shape reduces induced drag, the vortex created at the tip of the wing. By minimizing this drag, the ichthyosaur could glide for immense distances with minimal energy loss. The internal structure of the fin was a mosaic of tightly packed, polygonal bones that formed a rigid hydrofoil surface. Unlike the flexible hand of a human or the webbed foot of a duck, this paddle did not change shape during the stroke. It acted as a static control surface, like the aileron of a plane. The ichthyosaur steered by making micro-adjustments to the angle of attack of these rigid wings, banking and rolling through the water column with the precision of a fighter jet, using the lift generated by its fins to counteract the negative buoyancy of its heavy bones. The sensory capabilities of the ichthyosaur likely extended beyond vision and smell to include electroreception, a sixth sense found in modern sharks and some dolphins. On the snouts of well-preserved ichthyosaur skulls, particularly those of the earlier, more lizard-like species, paleontologists have identified rows of small, pitted foramina, holes in the bone that allowed nerves to pass through to the skin. These pits are strikingly similar to the ampullae of Lorenzini in sharks. If ichthyosaurs possessed this sense, they could detect the minute electrical fields generated by the muscle contractions of prey hidden in the sand, or the heartbeat of a fish in muddy water. This would have been an invaluable tool for hunting in the diverse environments of the Mesozoic. It would allow them to scan the seabed without touching it, sensing the spark of life buried beneath the sediment. It transforms the snout into a voltage meter, a sensitive probe reading the bioelectric signature of the ocean. The feeding mechanism of the giant Triassic Ichthyosaur Shastasaurus presents a paradox of size and dentition. Despite being the size of a sperm whale, the adults were toothless. The jaws of adult Shastasaurus are long and slender, but they lack the sockets or grooves for teeth found in their smaller cousins. This suggests they were suction feeders. To feed, Shastasaurus would have approached a school of squid or small fish and rapidly expanded its throat. This expansion creates a massive negative pressure vacuum inside the mouth. The water and the prey suspended in it would rush in to fill the void. This is the same method used by modern beaked whales. It requires a specialized hyoid apparatus, the bones at the base of the tongue, to be mobile and powerful. Shastasaurus was a giant vacuum cleaner of the Triassic, inhaling entire shoals of soft-bodied prey in a single gulp, proving that you don't need teeth to be a top predator if your mouth is big enough to swallow the water itself. The microscopic structure of the ichthyosaur tooth reveals a strengthening mechanism known as plissadentine, a feature that prevented their needle-like teeth from shattering against hard shells. If you were to cut an ichthyosaur tooth in cross-section, you would not see a smooth circle of dentine. Instead, you would see a complex, folded pattern, like the petals of a flower or the wrinkles of a brain. the enamel is enfolded deep into the tooth. This folding increases the surface area of attachment between the tooth and the jaw, and between the different layers of the tooth itself. It acts like the corrugation in cardboard, adding immense structural strength without adding weight. This adaptation was crucial for animals that slammed their jaws shut on struggling prey or crunched through ammonite shells. The plicidentine prevented the teeth from snapping off under sheer force. It is a hidden architecture of resilience, a microscopic reinforcement that kept the ichthyosaur's arsenal intact through years of violent feeding. The phenomenon of mass strandings in the fossil record suggests that ichthyosaurs, like modern whales, may have been susceptible to navigational errors or social catastrophes. At sites like the lias of Lyme Regis, clusters of ichthyosaur skeletons are sometimes found together. While some of these can be explained by currents washing carcasses into a depression, others show signs of simultaneous death. If ichthyosaurs relied on magnetic navigation or followed social leaders, a single error could lead a whole pod into shallow, dangerous waters. Alternatively, toxic algae blooms, red tides, could have suffocated them or poisoned their food source, leading to mass mortality. These graveyards are somber reminders that even the masters of the ocean are vulnerable to the invisible chemistry of the water and the errors of their own instincts. They lived together and, occasionally, they died together, their bodies settling in a heap on the Jurassic seafloor. The learning curve of a young ichthyosaur was a brutal gauntlet with a high mortality rate, evidenced by the sheer number of juvenile fossils found in the stomachs of predators. Born at a length of perhaps 2 or 3 feet, a baby ichthyosaur was a miniature replica of the adult, fully capable of swimming. However, it lacked the speed, the deep diving endurance, and the thermal mass of the parents. It had to learn to hunt immediately. There was no milk, no nursing. The mother's protection likely ended shortly after birth. The ocean was filled with sharks, pliosaurs, and even adult ichthyosaurs ready to eat them. The fossil record shows a nursery effect in some areas where juvenile fossils are abundant, suggesting they may have congregated in shallow, safer waters. But even there, survival was a game of chance. The early life of an ichthyosaur was a sprint for size, a desperate race to grow too big to be eaten. The interaction between ichthyosaurs and the giant filter-feeding fish Leadsichthys highlights the niche partitioning of the Jurassic seas. Leadsichthys was a massive fish, growing up to 50 feet long, that filtered plankton. It occupied the niche of the baleen whale. The ichthyosaurs occupied the niche of the toothed whale. They coexisted in the same oceans, but hunted different things. While Leadsichthys cruised slowly with its mouth open, sieving the water, the ichthyosaurs darted around it, chasing the squid and fish that were attracted to the giant's wake. This relationship shows a structured ecosystem where resources were divided by size and feeding style. The ocean was busy with giants. The ichthyosaur had to navigate a world where it was not the only leviathan, sharing the blue lanes with colossal fish that drifted like living clouds of bone and scale. The physiological adaptation for deep diving in ichthyosaurs likely involved a collapsible ribcage, a feature essential for avoiding the bends and mechanical trauma at depth. As an animal dives, the water pressure increases by 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters. At the depths ichthyosaurs likely hunted, the pressure would be crushing. If the ribcage were rigid, it would resist the pressure until it snapped. By having a flexible ribcage that could compress, the ichthyosaur allowed its lungs to collapse safely. This collapse forced the air out of the alveoli and into the non-absorptive trachea, preventing nitrogen from dissolving into the blood and causing the bends upon ascent. It also reduced the animal's buoyancy, making it easier to sink. This compressibility turned the Ichthyosaur into a variable volume vessel, a biological hull that could shrink under pressure and expand again at the surface, breathing with the entire rhythm of the dive. The intricate logistics of the tail-first birth, confirmed by the famous Stenopterygius specimen at the State Museum of Natural History Stuttgart, solves the problem of drowning during labor. In this fossil, the mother died with the baby partially expelled. The baby's head is still inside the mother's pelvic region, while the tail is free. This orientation meant that the baby could not take a breath until it was fully born. If it had been born head first, the stimulus of cold water on the snout might have triggered a gasp reflex while the chest was still compressed in the birth canal, leading to inhalation of fluid. The tail-first delivery delayed that first breath until the moment of total freedom. It also allowed the baby to use its tail to help push itself out. This birth position is a shared trait with modern cetaceans, a convergent solution to the dangers of being born in a liquid environment where the first requirement of life is a gulp of gas. The discovery of Cartorhynchus lentocarpus in China provided the long-sought, missing link that connected the dolphin-like Ichthyosaurs to their terrestrial ancestors. This creature, living in the early Triassic, was small, amphibious, and had large flippers that still retained mobile wrists. It had a short snout and likely suction-fed on bottom-dwelling invertebrates. Most importantly, its bones were heavy and thick, acting as ballast for a bottom walker. It could probably waddle on land like a sea turtle, but swam like a clumsy seal. Cartorhynchus fills the gap between the land-dwelling reptiles and the fully aquatic Ichthyosaurus. It shows us the awkward, intermediate stage of the transition, a creature that belonged to neither the land nor the sea, struggling in the mud of the Triassic shoreline, carrying the potential for a dynasty that would eventually leave the shore behind forever. The chemical environment of the black shales, like the Poseidonia shale, was the architect of the Ichthyosaur's immortality. These shales formed during periods of oceanic anoxia, where the seafloor was devoid of oxygen. This lack of oxygen was lethal to the bottom-dwelling scavengers, crabs and worms, that normally destroy carcasses. When an ichthyosaur sank into this toxic soup, it was safe from dismemberment. The sulfur-reducing bacteria that thrived in this environment produced hydrogen sulfide, which reacted with the iron in the water to form pyrite. This pyrite coated the bones and even the soft tissues, creating a mineral cast of the animal. The stink of the Jurassic mud, a poisonous, rotten egg environment, was the preservative agent. We owe our knowledge of the ichthyosaur's skin and shape to the fact that they died in places where nothing else could live. The broken back appearance of the tail in many ichthyosaur fossils is not an injury, but the defining feature of their propulsion. The vertebral column turns sharply downward into the lower lobe of the tail fin. This bend is formed by a series of wedge-shaped vertebrae. The angle of this bend correlates with the swimming speed. Fast swimmers had a sharp bend, high angle, creating a stiff, vertical tail fluke for powerful thrust. Slower swimmers had a shallow bend. This skeletal kink provided the leverage needed to beat the tail against the dense water. It is a structural commitment to the aquatic life. Once the tail bent, there was no going back to land. The tail became a propeller, a specialized organ of thrust that could no longer drag along the ground, locking the animal into a life of perpetual swimming. The transition from four-flippered swimming to two-flippered dominance tracks, the shift from maneuverability to stability. Early ichthyosaurs and the transitional forms often had large pelvic fins, hind flippers, that were nearly the same size as the pectoral fins, front flippers. They used all four limbs to steer and stabilize, perhaps even paddling with them. As the lineage evolved towards the tuna shape, the propulsion moved entirely to the tail. The front flippers remained large to act as hydroplanes for depth control, but the back flippers shrank dramatically. In later species like Ophthalmosaurus, the pelvic fins are tiny, vestigial tabs. The animal became a front-wheel drive, steerable missile powered by a rear engine. This reduction of the hind limbs mirrors the evolution of whales, which lost their hind legs entirely, streamlining the hull for maximum efficiency in the forward direction. The metabolic cost of the ichthyosaur's cruising speed necessitated a high-energy diet and a sophisticated circulatory system. To swim at 25 miles per hour, an animal burns massive amounts of oxygen and glucose. The ichthyosaur likely had a large, four-chambered heart, similar to mammals and birds, capable of separating oxygenated and deoxygenated blood to deliver high-pressure oxygen to the muscles. Isotopic analysis of phosphate in their teeth suggests a metabolic rate much higher than any modern reptile. They were tachymetabolic, fast burners. This high metabolism meant they had to eat constantly. They could not sit and wait like a crocodile. They were driven by a metabolic hunger that forced them to scour the oceans, turning calories into speed, living life at a pace that was unheard of for a reptile. The use of the sclerotic ring as a depth gauge for paleontologists relies on the relationship between eye size and light sensitivity. By measuring the diameter of the sclerotic ring and the aperture, the hole in the middle, scientists can calculate the F number of the ichthyosaur eye. A low F number means a bright image, suitable for dark conditions. Ichthyosaurs consistently have very low F numbers, similar to deep-sea fish and nocturnal owls. This mathematical ratio, preserved in stone, tells us how deep they could see. It allows us to reconstruct their behavior without ever seeing them swim. We know Ophthalmosaurus could hunt at 500 meters or more because its eye geometry was tuned for the photon density at that specific depth. The bone captures the physics of the light environment they lived in. The migration hypothesis for ichthyosaurs is supported by the strontium isotope signatures in their teeth. Strontium ratios in seawater vary depending on the local geology of the river basins draining into the ocean. As an animal grows its teeth, it locks in the strontium signature of the water it is living in. Analysis of ichthyosaur teeth often shows a changing signal from youth to adulthood, or seasonal fluctuations. This suggests they moved between different water masses. They may have had specific breeding grounds in shallow, protected bays and feeding grounds in the open ocean or high latitudes. Like modern grey whales or sea turtles, they were travelers. They followed the seasons across the Jurassic globe, their lives defined by a great circular journey that spanned thousands of miles of blue water. The evidence of cannibalism in Temnodontosaurus stomachs is not just about diet. It's about the brutal reality of the marine food web. The presence of smaller ichthyosaurs inside the ribs of the giant indicates that they were high-value targets. A juvenile ichthyosaur is a perfect packet of fat and protein, without the hard shell of an ammonite or the spines of a fish. It is soft, energy-dense, and shaped like a torpedo, easy to swallow. This predation pressure would have driven the rapid growth rates of the young. It also creates a picture of a species that fears its own elders. The nursery grounds were not safe havens. They were hunting grounds for the adults. Survival meant avoiding the shadow of your own kind. The discovery of preserved blubber in the fossil Stenopterygius confirmed once and for all that these were warm-blooded animals. In exceptionally preserved specimens, the outline of the skin is separated from the bones by a thick layer of amorphous material. Chemical analysis of this layer revealed fatty acids consistent with blubber. Blubber is an insulator. A cold-blooded animal does not need blubber. In fact, blubber would prevent it from warming up in the sun. Only a warm-blooded animal that generates its own heat needs to trap it. This layer of fat streamlined the body and kept the core warm in the cold Mesozoic currents. It transformed the ichthyosaur from a reptile into a biological thermos, capable of maintaining a constant temperature regardless of the chill of the deep water. The dislocation of the Ichthyosaur skull bones during fossilization, particularly the scattering of the sclerotic plates, often creates a chaotic mosaic on the rock face. These delicate plates, held together by ligaments in life, fall apart like a house of cards when the connective tissue rots. Finding a perfect, articulated ring is rare. More often, the eye is a jumble of bone chips. This disintegration is a reminder of the fragility of the complex structures that allowed them to rule. The eye, the most sophisticated organ of the Ichthyosaur, is the first thing to fall apart after death. The rock preserves the pieces, but the perfect geometry of the living lens is lost to the entropy of decay, leaving us to reconstruct the vision of the dragon from the shards of its goggles. The global dominance of the Cretaceous genus Prehistoric represents the final cosmopolitan flourish of the Ichthyosaur dynasty before the lights went out. Unlike the specialized regional species of the Jurassic, Prehistoric was a generalist that conquered the world. Fossils of this animal have been found in Australia, Russia, North America, and Europe. It possessed a robust, heavy body and flippers that were uniquely characterized by polydactyly, having far more fingers than the standard 5. These broad, multi-digit paddles allowed for exceptional maneuverability in shallow, turbulent waters. This adaptability suggests that as the climate warmed and the sea levels rose, flooding the continents to create vast, shallow inland seas like the Western Interior Seaway, Prehistoric followed the water. It moved into the flooded interiors of the continents, patrolling the warm, murky seaways that split North America in two. It was the last great explorer of the lineage, a rugged survivor that refused to specialize too narrowly, maintaining a foothold in every ocean basin, while the world around it began to change into a hothouse environment that would eventually become hostile to its kind. The mysterious survival of Acamptonectes densus into the early Cretaceous challenges the idea that ichthyosaurs were declining long before their extinction. This species, whose name translates to rigid swimmer, possessed a vertebral column that was tightly interlocked, allowing for almost no flexibility in the neck or trunk. It was a stiff-bodied torpedo, even more so than its predecessors. This extreme stiffness indicates a high-speed, pelagic lifestyle, similar to a modern tuna. Its existence proves that ichthyosaurs were still evolving new, hyper-efficient body plans right up until the end. They were not an evolutionary dead end that slowly ran out of steam. They were innovating. Acamptonectes had eyes that were relatively smaller than the Jurassic ophthalmosaurids, suggesting it may have hunted in brighter, shallower waters or targeted different prey. It was a specialist speedster, a biological arrow shot through the Cretaceous ocean, proving that the engineering of the Ichthyosaur chassis was still being refined only millions of years before the entire group vanished. The Cenomanian-Turonian boundary event, also known as Oceanic Anoxic Event 2, OAE2, is the likely smoking gun for the Ichthyosaur extinction. Roughly 94 million years ago, massive volcanic activity, possibly from the Caribbean large igneous province, pumped enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The planet warmed rapidly. The oceans stratified. The warm surface water stopped mixing with the cold, deep water. Oxygen levels in the ocean plummeted. For a high metabolism predator like the Ichthyosaur, this was catastrophic. They needed oxygen-rich water to sustain their active lifestyles. Furthermore, the anoxia caused a collapse in the populations of belemnites and ammonites, their primary food source. The squid of the Cretaceous suffocated. The ichthyosaurs faced a double threat: a lack of breath in the water and a lack of food in the ecosystem. They were squeezed out of existence by the chemistry of the ocean itself, suffocated by the very heat that made the reptiles on land thrive. The rise of the mosasaurs in the late Cretaceous is often cited as a cause for ichthyosaur extinction, but the timeline suggests a passing of the torch rather than a war of conquest. Mosasaurs, which are giant marine lizards related to monitor lizards and snakes, exploded in diversity only after the ichthyosaurs had already declined or disappeared. This ecological replacement suggests that the mosasaurs did not outcompete the ichthyosaurs. They simply moved into the empty mansions left behind. The ocean hates a vacuum. When the fast-swimming, deep-diving ichthyosaurs vanished due to climate change, the niche of large marine predator was left open. The mosasaurs, with their ambush tactics and massive jaws, evolved to fill it. The extinction of the ichthyosaur was the catalyst for the rise of the sea serpents. It was a silent handover of power, where the dolphin-shaped reptiles faded away and the lizard-shaped reptiles rose up to take the throne of the apex predator. The specialized predator Ichthyosaur sachicarum, discovered in Colombia, reveals that Cretaceous ichthyosaurs were evolving distinct macro-predatory adaptations to hunt large vertebrate prey. Unlike the squid-eating specialists with needle teeth, Ichthyosaur had teeth with distinct cutting edges and varied shapes. Heterodonty. This allowed it to slice through flesh and crush bone. It likely hunted other marine reptiles, sea turtles, and large fish. This shift to eating red meat rather than squid suggests that the food web was changing. As the belemnites declined, some ichthyosaurs tried to adapt by moving up the food chain. Ichthyosaur was a reptilian wolf, a heavy-jawed hunter that patrolled the tropical seas of South America, evolving the tools to dismember large prey in a desperate bid to find calories in a changing ocean. The competition with the pachycormid fish, a group of giant filter feeders like lead zichthys and predatory tuna-like fish, may have squeezed the ichthyosaurs from the other side. During the Jurassic and Cretaceous, bony fish were evolving rapidly. They were becoming faster and more efficient. Large predatory fish could occupy the same niche as medium-sized ichthyosaurs. They hunted the same squid and small fish. A large predatory fish does not need to surface to breathe. It can stay submerged indefinitely. This gave them a tactical advantage in the chase. The ichthyosaurs were fighting a war on two fronts: climate change from above, destroying their oxygen and food, and the rise of the modern superfish from below, competing for every meal. They were the old guard, the reptilian aristocracy, slowly being displaced by the new, gill-breathing upstarts of the teleost revolution. The discovery of pigment cells in the fossilized skin of Stenopterygius has confirmed that they possessed a layer of subcutaneous blubber, a finding that definitively settles the warm-blooded debate. Cold-blooded reptiles do not have thick layers of fat under their skin. They need the sun to warm their blood. Blubber is an insulator used to trap internal heat. Finding fossilized blubber, yellow amorphous material preserved in the rock, proves that ichthyosaurs were generating their own heat and needed to keep it. This insulation allowed them to cruise at high speeds in the cold waters of the deep ocean or high latitudes without losing metabolic efficiency. They were endothermic homeotherms, maintaining a stable, high body temperature just like a modern dolphin or a tuna. This makes their extinction even more tragic. They were not sluggish lizards that got too cold. They were high-performance machines that overheated or starved when the ocean's engines stalled. The acoustic environment of the ichthyosaur was likely dominated by low-frequency sounds, as indicated by the heavy, stout structure of their stapes bone. While they probably did not have the high-frequency echolocation of a dolphin, which requires complex nasal sacs and a melon, they would have been sensitive to the thrum of the ocean. They could hear the low-frequency pressure waves of a swimming school of fish, the crashing of surf on distant reefs, or the calls of other marine reptiles. The heavy ear bone suggests they relied on bone conduction, feeling the sound vibrate through their skulls. They lived in a world of rumbles and vibrations, a soundscape where the movement of water was as loud as a roar. This sensory modality allowed them to detect large objects moving in the dark, sensing the displacement of the sea before they could see the source. The Lazarus effect in paleontology refers to a group of animals that disappears from the fossil record and then reappears later, but the Ichthyosaurs experience the opposite, a dead clade walking. In the final few million years of their existence, their diversity crashed. They went from dozens of genera to just one or two. They were ecologically marginalized long before they went extinct. This slow attrition suggests that the environment was gradually turning against them. The loss of breeding grounds due to sea level changes, the acidification of the ocean, and the loss of specific prey types whittled them down. They didn't vanish in a catastrophe, they were eroded. The last ichthyosaur swam alone in a warming sea, the end of a lineage that had conquered the planet, dying not with a bang, but with a quiet failure to reproduce in a world that no longer had room for them. The artistic legacy of the ichthyosaur began with Duria antiquior, a more ancient Dorset, a famous watercolor painted by Henry de la Beche in 1830. This was the first scene of deep time ever reconstructed from fossil evidence. It depicts a chaotic, violent Jurassic Sea. In the center, an ichthyosaur is biting the long neck of a plesiosaur. This image defined the public perception of the ichthyosaur for nearly 2 centuries, a violent, crocodile-like monster. It established the genre of paleo art. While we now know the animal looked more like a smooth dolphin than a scaly dragon, that initial image of the reptilian battle remains the archetypal nightmare of the primeval seer. It captured the Victorian fascination with the red in-tooth and claw nature of the pre-human world, cementing the ichthyosaur as the original sea monster of science. The discovery of the fossil Cartahicus, having large flippers but a short snout, suggests that the evolution of the beak happened after the evolution of the fins. The ancestors of the ichthyosaur learned to swim before they learned to snap. They were suction feeders first. The elongation of the jaw into the classic sword shape was a later adaptation for catching fast prey in open water. This fins-first evolution highlights the priority of locomotion. To survive in the sea, you must first be able to move. Only then can you refine how you eat. The ichthyosaur was a swimmer before it was a hunter, a terrestrial refugee that paddled into the deep and then sharpened its face to match its speed. The battering ram hypothesis for the reinforced snouts of some Cretaceous ichthyosaurs like Platypterygius suggests they may have used their heads as weapons. The bone at the tip of the snout is often dense and thickened. In a world crowded with other marine reptiles and sharks, physical combat was likely common. Male ichthyosaurs may have jousted with their bills or used them to ram predators to protect their young. This behavior is seen in modern beaked whales and dolphins. The snout was not just a pair of forceps, it was a lance. Fossil snouts are often found with healed fractures, indicating that these animals engaged in violent, head-on collisions and survived, carrying the scars of their battles on their faces. The unique preservation of the tail bend in ichthyosaur fossils was originally interpreted by Richard Owen, the founder of the Natural History Museum in London, as a sign of a dislocated tail. He believed the animal had a straight tail like a lizard and that the bend was a post-mortem artifact. It was only when specimens with the skin impression of the tail fluke were found that Owen was proven wrong. This error highlights the difficulty of reconstructing an animal from bone alone. The soft tissue holds the truth of the shape. The broken tail was actually the structural support for the most important organ of propulsion. The mistake persisted for decades, illustrating how our preconceived notions of what a reptile looks like can blind us to the evidence of radical evolutionary adaptation. The sheer size difference between the eyes of ichthyosaurs and other marine reptiles is a testament to their deep-diving specialization. Plesiosaurs and mosasaurs generally had smaller eyes relative to their body size. This suggests they stayed closer to the surface or relied on other senses like smell. The ichthyosaur invested massive metabolic energy in building and maintaining its giant eyes. Evolution does not produce expensive organs unless they are necessary. The giant eye proves that vision was the primary interface between the ichthyosaur and its world. They were visual processors, dedicating a huge portion of their brain to interpreting the dim, blue signals of the deep. They lived in a visual reality that was higher resolution and more sensitive than anything else in the Mesozoic ocean. The suction-feeding mechanism of Shastasaurus required a massive hyoid apparatus, the bones that support the tongue and throat muscles. In fossils of Shastasaurus, the hyoid rods are enormous, as thick as baseball bats. These bones anchored the muscles that could snap the throat open, creating a sudden vacuum. This allowed the 50-foot animal to inhale prey without chasing it. It is a strategy of bulk feeding. Instead of picking off one squid at a time, Shastasaurus could engulf a whole school. This parallels the feeding of sperm whales and humpback whales. It is the strategy of the giant. When you are too big to turn quickly, you simply bring the water to you. The preservation of embryonic teeth in the fossils of unborn ichthyosaurs suggests that the babies developed their teeth while still in the womb. This is significant because it means they were born ready to hunt. They did not need a period of nursing or parental feeding. They emerged from the mother as fully equipped predators, miniature killing machines with a mouth full of needles. This precocial development was essential for survival in the open ocean, where there is no place to hide. A baby ichthyosaur had to catch its first meal within hours of being born, or it would starve. The womb was a factory that produced finished products, not helpless infants. The global currents of the Mesozoic, particularly the Tethys Seaway that circled the equator, acted as a superhighway for ichthyosaur dispersal. The warm, nutrient-rich waters of the Tethys allowed populations to mix between Europe, Asia, and the Americas. This connectivity prevented speciation from isolating groups too severely. It homogenized the ichthyosaur fauna. You could find the same genera in England and in Argentina. They were the first true global citizens of the vertebrate world, riding the equatorial current that belted the planet. A single, continuous population of reptiles that knew no borders, only the temperature gradient of the water, the oil-filled. Bones of ichthyosaurs are a hypothesis derived from the texture of the fossils. Some ichthyosaur bones are spongy and porous, similar to the oil-filled bones of cetaceans. Oil is lighter than water. By saturating their spongy bones with lipids, ichthyosaurs could increase their buoyancy without relying solely on air in their lungs. This would allow them to dive deeper without being crushed, as the oil is incompressible. It would also act as an energy reserve. If true, the ichthyosaur skeleton was not just a frame. It was a fuel tank and a flotation device, a lipid-soaked chassis that helped the animal manage the physics of vertical movement in the water column. The ultimate legacy of the ichthyosaur is written in the concept of convergence. They proved that physics is the ultimate arbiter of design. If you want to move a vertebrate body through water efficiently, you must build a tuna shape. The ichthyosaur did it with reptile bones. The dolphin did it with mammal bones. The tuna did it with fish bones. The shark did it with cartilage. They all arrived at the same destination from different starting points. The ichthyosaur was the first tetrapod to solve this equation perfectly. It is the gold standard of aquatic adaptation. When we look at a dolphin today, we are looking at a mammalian echo of the reptilian master that solved the problem first, 150 million years ago. And finally, we come to the silence of the rock itself, the final resting place of the sea dragon. The Ichthyosaur is gone. It left no descendants. Its lineage was cut short, leaving the ocean to the plesiosaurs, then the mosasaurs, and finally the whales. But in the cliffs of Dorset and the shales of Germany, it is still swimming. The stone has captured the curve of its spine, the ring of its eye, and the outline of its fins. It waits in the grey rock, a perfect hydrodynamic ghost. As we drift away from the Jurassic coast, leaving the cliffs to the erosion of the tide, we carry with us the image of the first true master of the blue water, a creature that looked into the deep with a giant eye and saw a world that belonged to it entirely. As we ascend from the depths of geological time, the slate-grey water turns to the clear blue of the present. The shadows of the giant reptiles fade, replaced by the songs of whales. You are safe. You are drifting. Good night. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of the Ichthyosaur, I invite you to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. It helps this little submersible of curiosity find its way to other sleepy travelers. But for now, let the current carry you. Let the deep time hold you. You are safe. You are drifting. Good night.